The first Australian soldiers to serve in Vietnam were 30 members of the Australian Army training team, all highly trained officers and warrant officers with combat experience. They arrived in Vietnam at the end of July 1962. In the 10 years that followed, 60,000 Australians saw duty in Vietnam with the Army, Navy and Air Force. 523 died as a result of the war. Another 3,500 were wounded or injured. Australia was committed to supporting the American campaign to defeat the communist regime in North Vietnam and its guerrilla army, the Viet Cong. At home, the war became increasingly unpopular, especially after the government introduced the National Service Act in November 1964, compelling 20-year-old male Australians to register and then be subject to a conscription ballot based on their birth dates. More than 15,300 national servicemen were sent to Vietnam. 200 were killed. Australia also committed civilian medical teams of surgeons and nurses between 1964 and 72. As a diplomatic gesture under the Southeast Asia Treaty Organisation, 240 doctors and 210 nurses were employed by the Department of External Affairs to assist in South Vietnamese civilian hospitals. The nurses experienced a very different type of war.
I'd always wanted to work somewhere where I felt I was really needed, in a third world country, or somewhere where I felt I could do more. And, feel that there was perhaps someone that there was not as many people there to do it.
What sort of preparation did you get to go to?
Very little. We only had a matter of weeks' notice. We were picked up by official cars and flown to Canberra and had a day's indoctrination of our role there and how we weren't to have male boots in our corridors and we met as a team, most of us, and they took us to lunch and we had the history of Vietnam and the war and that sort of thing. Yeah.
There wasn't much in the way of preparation.
No, it wasn't. And it's certainly, my father was very anti-me going. He was a Second World War veteran and he said, leave it to the people. You're too young, you leave it to people. I said, they've got more sense. They won't go. It was a Vietnamese hospital in town and we weren't allowed to look after the maternity patients. We looked after the operating theatre and the recovery area and the general ward sort of thing, yeah. I looked after their recovery, come intensive care, if you want to call it that, and the lack of equipment was just incredible.
So it wasn't as though you were getting to nurse Australian soldiers?
No. Of course, we lived out of town. We had an old VW Combi van which had a white and a red cross and a little Jeep with white and a red cross, and it was an open Jeep. And I was driving it home one night and a little man in black pyjamas with a gun stepped out from behind a bush and I put my head down and put my foot on the accelerator and just kept going. But I really believe that they knew we were looking after Vietnamese and some of their own, and we weren't really in danger. I think they really respected what we were doing, mostly.
Girl, I remember very clearly, I can still see her face, a bar girl, and she had no family. She'd been disowned by her family and she was working in the bar. And I can't recall what was the matter with her, but she had no one to care for her. And one night we used to go back at night to do the rounds and give out the medications, and there was a rat eating her nose. And the people in the next bed had their family to look after them, but no one made any effort to help this girl. She died that night.
A rat was actually eating?
A rat was gnawing on her nose.
In bed, in the hospital?
Yes, and as I said, there were patients on the other side who had family to care for them, but no one had made an effort to move the rat. That was really confronting. That was terrible.
Were rats common?
Yes, yeah. One night I was with my interpreter and we opened the medicine cupboard and a rat jumped out of the medical cabinet. And I landed on his, I just screamed and, he got into the rat. There were a few Viet Cong who'd had probably come to us with broken arms, maybe gunshots, whatever. They were just young men, and one was a girl, actually, I remember. And they were fixed up by our surgeons, and then in bed. And then the ARVN, which was the South Vietnamese army, came and just took one of them away, and I just couldn't work out, why. But this young man, not really comprehending that he was in fact Viet Cong, so they would come and know that they were Viet Cong and take them away. And my interpreter was, I said, "What's happening? Where are they going?" He said, "Oh, they're going to shoot him." So because he was Viet Cong. Yes, and I hadn't had much paediatric experience at that time, but yes, there were lots of babies, as I mentioned, needing formula and stuff, but not the one that was actually sent to us. A lot of them had worm infestations, terrible worm infestations. So some of the little ones, the little babies, you could actually see their skin was so thin and they were so malnourished, you could actually see the movement of the worms inside. Yeah, so that was confronting as well.
And then somebody came running past, an American came running past and said, "You guys had better get back to your hospital because it's got a whole pile of dead bodies on the lawn." I said, "What?" So we leapt back in the vehicle. Threw our clothes back on, threw our gear back on, our working gear. Drove back to Leloy Hospital, and there were indeed dead bodies all over the ground in front of the hospital. I couldn't believe it. So we walked into a little operating theatre suite that most of us worked in. I worked in the theatres some of the time, but I also worked in a clinic. The clinic wasn't working, nothing was working. Opened our unit, because we had the keys to that, let ourselves in, and then suddenly hundreds of people, not thousands, hundreds of people came flooding from everywhere and just tried to keep pushing their way into our little unit. They were, all of them, very badly injured. They had terrible injuries. Or they were bringing members of their family who had terrible injuries. They had lots of head injuries. And we said, "What happened?" A couple of Yanks were around and they actually said, yes, the Saigon is under fire, it's closed, and these people have come from all the different hamlets around Vung Tau.
Australian soldiers went on patrols and fought in Vietnam in tight-knit units, side by side, regardless of whether they were regular army or national servicemen. The Australian forces were assigned to Phuoc Thi province on the southern coast, about 40 kilometres from Saigon, now called Ho Chi Minh City. Much of the province was covered in rainforest, but rice paddies were abundant. The main Australian base was on a hill called Nui Dat, surrounded by abandoned rubber plantations.
So we had 12 months in Vietnam. I was platoon sergeant of 11 platoon in Delta Company. For most of the tour, I was the acting platoon commander, as they kept posting the officers on our strength, but in different jobs. So I had my senior corporal, my acting platoon sergeant, and I was acting platoon commander for the majority of the tour. So our company had 7 killed and 20 wounded in our 12 months, and all those injuries come from the other 2 platoons. My platoon, we were very lucky. We had just as many contacts as the others, but we didn't have anyone wounded or killed. We had no one got medevac home with malaria, which the other platoons had quite a few sent home, so we had the 12 months with no big problems. In our platoon, we probably had about half our soldiers were national servicemen, but if I asked you to pick out the national servicemen, you wouldn't be able to. They blended in good, there were no problems, and in fact the national servicemen were probably a bit older than the regular army blokes, because they had to register when they were 21, so by the time we got them they were 22, whereas young volunteers could go overseas when they were 18. We used to go out for up to 2 weeks at a time, and we'd carry as much rations for probably about a week, and after about a week we'd get resupplied, and because we used to get resupplied with stuff that we didn't think we were getting. Because we used to come across some old American camps and find a lot of rubbish with ice cream containers and that. We said, what's going on here? And all of a sudden we're getting resupplied, we get ice cream. And we rarely went on tracks. We normally went through compass bearing through the jungle, because you weren't on tracks. You'd either there could be mines or it could ambush. So we would go cross country, and if we come across a track with fresh tracks on it, we would sort of lay an ambush for the day or the night, and then the next day, and that's where we got a lot of our contacts, by ambushing tracks that have been used frequently. Didn't have any feelings towards them at all. We knew that if they had the opportunity, they would kill us, and so it's just self-defence, really. And some of the atrocities that the Viet Cong did during the time in Vietnam. For example, there's a floating restaurant in Saigon, a lot of people in there, and the Viet Cong threw a grenade through the door. People run out and shot them all as they come out. And know that the women, kids, and they didn't seem to care. And a lot of the villages that we used to visit to give them first aid and a bit of food. If the Viet Cong knew that they were assisting us, then the next day they'd find their head man laying there with his throat cut.
Quite often the contacts, it's the forward scout that hits the initial thing. It's seldom that the enemy sort of dig in or hang around to take on an infantry platoon. You've got an awful lot of firepower, and in many cases they sort of shoot and run. So it's a matter of following up. Sometimes you might get wounded, guys. You've got to follow up. One occasion we were ambushing or setting up an ambush on a track, and Gary and I had been sent forward to just as early warning on the track, and this chap came wandering. This enemy came wandering down the track towards us, and Gary was on one side of the track and I was on the other side of the track. And I sort of looked across at him, and he said, "You, me, who's going to knock this guy over?" And anyway, he ended up doing it. But we let the guy come up to within about, I suppose, 15 metres of us, and Gary knocked him over. And this guy was a North Vietnamese Army officer who'd come down all the way down through the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We found this out later on, and walked all the way down. He was supposed to be meeting somebody somewhere, and he met us instead, which was rather sad, I suppose. But he had quite a lot of papers, information on him, so we handed that all into the intelligence guys. One of the things that was, I suppose, unique in Vietnam about the Australian base was that there was no Vietnamese allowed in there, none. Whereas the Americans made use of a lot of local help for cleaning and that sort of stuff. We did all that. We looked after ourselves completely, so there was no Indigenous help available to us, and not that we wanted it, but that was, I suppose, one of the good things about the camp at Nui Dat. It was incredibly well fortified, multiple layers of barbed wire, very, very, very difficult place to get into. Having to put your mates, your dead mates on a chopper to have them evacuated is probably one of the hardest things I ever did, I think. Because you knew these guys, you'd served with them and you'd lived with them for, months and months and months on end, and to lose somebody, there's nothing harder.
Born and raised in Tasmania, in the Midlands. And I thought, well, there's only one way I'm going to get out of this place. That's join the forces. So I went down to Hobart and put my name in, and I was 17 at the time. And I went home and I thought, well, that's the end of that. I won't hear from them again. So it was only a few weeks later, they notified me to go back to Hobart, sent me a ticket and everything on the bus. Went down to Anglesey Barracks and got sworn in, and flew over to Melbourne, caught the bus up to Wagga, up to Kapuka, and did me recruit training there. Then they sent me up to Ingleburn to do the battle wing infantry training. And most of the blokes that I did that with, they left to go to make up 9 RA, to go to Vietnam, but I was too young. So they sent me to demo platoon, which was demonstration platoon. So I had to, our group, we did all the demonstrations on the new recruits and that came in. We'd show them how to, the tactical formations and the complex when you're putting all round protection with pits, camouflage, all this sort of stuff, all the training that they needed to see. Well, we were the guinea pigs that did it. So, and then one night I'd turned 18. Yeah, I was 18 by then when I got through battle wing and everything. And I was in demo platoon. And they came round. Demo platoon was right next to reinforcement wing for the Rios to go to Vietnam to replace the guys that got casevaced or killed or whatever. So they said to me, "Are you in Rio wing?" And I said, yeah. So grab your gear, you're going. So I went straight into Mascot, jumped on a plane full of us. We flew to Singapore and we're in polyesters. And when we got to Singapore, we all had to change our shirts to a civvy shirt. So we all came off a plane with black shoes, polyester strides, psychedelic shirts and whatever, to so that we didn't show that we were in the armed forces going through Singapore. So it was some political thing. Anyway, I got a card and posted it to my parents, telling them where I was or where I was going, and that was all right. Went to Vietnam and went to reinforcement, 1 ARU, reinforcement unit. And I was there for a while. We used to go do the patrols out the wire and the clearing patrols around the area and whatever. And then they posted me to 4 RAR as a reinforcement. I came home on R&R and I got married. Went to Tassie to show my parents my new bride. And that card I posted in Singapore still hadn't arrived.
I had less than 3 weeks to come home, and they had a policy of trying to bring blokes who they call short time into safe harbour, and we've been out in the bush on an operation called Goodwood for about 40 days or something like that. And they called me into support section, which virtually all it does is protect the headquarters. You know, you do pickets while the other platoons are out doing patrols and that sort of stuff, and it was pretty cushy. And one morning the resupply chopper came in. It was on the 15th of February. The resupply came in, and the warrant officer Jock Richardson, he said to me, I was out with the reply unloading the chopper with a couple of other blokes, and he said to me, Paul, he said, exchange weapons with Maguire. So Bluey Maguire was a bloke that he'd come over about a week after me as a RIA. Nice bloke, and I didn't know him until he came to Vietnam, but we'd sort of developed a bit of a friendship. And so he was happy to take over. I was actually carrying a machine gun at the time, and so we swapped weapons, and he was cock-a-hoop about, burning bin support section. This was the next day, the 16th, in the afternoon after lunch, just after lunch. They moved into a position to recce this bunker system. So, which is unusual. Jock Richardson, the warrant officer, decided to take support section, which is the one I just left, out to reconnoitre the other side of the clearing. They'd come to a large clearing, and they decided that they'd send support section out, see what was on the other side. And they got halfway across cutting around the corner of this large clearing, and all hell broke loose. They hit with claymore mines and rocket propelled grenades, small arms and machine gun fire. And Bluey and his offsider, like named Vic Peterson, they were badly hit. Bluey was killed instantly, and Vic was badly wounded. As it turned out, the Tet Offensive was starting at midnight that night, so a couple of other platoons came in, Beat Company and 4 Platoon Beat Company, and a couple of other platoons from, I think it was C Company.
But of course, you might well have been there yourself, had you?
Well, 24 hours or so I would have been, yeah. Another day I would have been.
How do you feel about that? That still really concerns you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. When you think about it all the time. Come 16th of February, I always celebrate my second birthday. I reckon I got out of it. But I still remember Bluey and Vic, and we went to Canberra just recently for a memorial down there, and I laid a wreath for both of them. I don't think the war was all that done much for anybody, but as far as me personally, I think it was worthwhile. I think, as I say, the friendships I made, the experience.
But it changed your life.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it did change my life. Yeah.
I was older than most of the guys. I was married, and I had 2 children. And most of the guys were national servicemen, and they were all 20s and 21. I was 28 when I went to Vietnam. And I was sort of had a lot more experience than those guys because I'd been with the CMF for many years. The last operation I was on was Operation Hammersley out in the Long Highs. That's where I had my mine incident. But that was a very touchy place out there at the time. And we lost a couple of APC crew were killed, a couple more hit mines, and then I hit a mine also.
And what happened?
We went bang and I went bang. And the next, they had me dusted off by a dust-off helicopter. They took me to Bung Tau Hospital, where I was treated. I was badly burnt, and I had my jaw ripped away from down from my face. I had my teeth all broken up. And I've had crowns and caps and plugs put in for my teeth, especially the top row. They're false. They're all screwed in. They built a false top jaw for me out of special material. And I was the first Australian casualty to have a thing called Pfizer hex. They used to bathe me and put this Pfizer hex on me after they'd bathe me to get the black powder burns and all that off. And they do that once or twice a day. When they put over the blisters and everything, when they broke, they put the Pfizer hex on me twice a day. And it used to pain like it was unbelievable. I was the first Australian casualty. It was discovered in a laboratory in Houston, Texas. And they used to give me morphine shots, and I got too gun and I got it hooked onto the morphine. And when I'd wait till the pain had just about gone, and I'd ask him for me shot of morphine, and I'd be laying in the bed with my arms up like this and my chin back, and they used to call me the Scarecrow.
I got called up in 1967 when I turned 20, but I was studying at the time, so I actually managed to get a deferment for 2 years and didn't go into national service until 1969. So in some respects, I was at a bit of an advantage being 2 years older than the normal cohort that went in, and I think that gave me some advantages with maturity and what have you. But I was pretty peed off with being called up because I was studying, I was building a career, enjoying the good life, and I saw it as stopping life, and I'm wondering why. In fact, we had to do this. My father was totally against it, and he didn't want me to go in there at all, and his view was I should have become a conscientious objector and go to jail because he had some bad experiences in the Second World War in New Guinea. And I think he was suffering PTSD, which they didn't understand back then. And he had a troubled life after the war. But as I said, I just saw it as a bit of a change in lifestyle and a bit of adventure. And so, and I'm always one for putting my hand up for challenges anyway. Even being in Nui Dat and doing our usual duties in BHQ, we were still required to do picket duties and man the perimeter each night. So each night you're on 2 hours on, 4 hours off. So if you had a 6 to 8 guards duty, you had 4 hours, you're back on the pit again at 12 o'clock for another 2 hours. And this went on for 12 months. So sleep deprivation was a really big thing. The constant heat and humidity as well builds on it, and there's this constant tiredness all the time. You can never really relax, and that's what I found quite difficult too. And we didn't come away unscathed. I've got serious PTSD. My PTSD is a good one in some respects because I'm super active, super hyper, so I seem to get myself involved in a lot of activities just to hide all that other stuff, put it aside. I don't get on the grog and drugs like the other side of PTSD does. I've had 2 doses of cancer, and my wife's had multiple miscarriages, which we put down to Agent Orange. No one will admit it, but it's fairly evident. DVA has supported me with that, with those conditions. So in a way that they're inadvertently saying, yes, you've got these conditions because of your service in Vietnam, and was probably Agent Orange. A
lot of blokes did. They knew they were going to get a war service loan for a home. A few other benefits which we didn't know much about, but definitely the war service home loan was a bit of an incentive. And obviously being young, we didn't bother thinking about what if anything happened and we didn't come back, that didn't matter. So we just said, right, we'll go in. Fortunately, we didn't get into any contacts sort of immediately. We ended up having a couple of small skirmishes early in the piece, and then we actually went in and had a couple of bigger battles at a later date. And we ended up fighting the last major battle of the war in September 1971 in a place called Neuilly. And we had 5 men killed, 30 wounded on that afternoon. So it was my company, B Company, was involved. Delta Company had all the kills, killed in action, and 14 wounded, and we had 16 wounded, and we had 14 wounded. Several seriously had to be sent back to Australia. Patrolling was all very slow. You weren't walking at normal pace. You were patrolling very slowly. The thicker the jungle got, the slower you did, because you just had to work your way through it. We did not use machetes or anything like that to cut our way through the jungle because they make just way too much noise. We basically used secateurs, and the forward scout would basically cut his way through while keeping an eye out for any enemy that might turn up in front of him. And then people behind the forward scout would slowly widen the track and we'd just follow. 5 or 6 day turnaround, so you'd come back in off your ops, you'd get cleaned up, you'd usually have a beer and feed, bit of a booze up that night. Then we would go and, if our ammunition was getting too old, we'd go and blow it all off, then get issued with new ammunition. Then we'd go down to Bung Tower, mainly for 36 hours. Have plenty of things to beer and enjoy the local sights, and then get trucked back to Nui Then you'd probably go on a Red Reaction Force for a couple of days, then back out into the jungle.
Well, the issue was it was all an unknown. Being in the first intake, we filled out the paperwork, and then we got the notice of call up, and we went through the medical and that, but it was all an unknown. There was no Vietnam that as such at that stage. There was a little bit of army stuff going on in Borneo, but we weren't people, that wasn't making any headlines anywhere. So it was all an unknown, and I had a reasonably good job at that point of time. I was working at Concordians down in the Snowy Mountains when I got the letter to say I was called up. So from that, my work moved me up to Sydney, and I was there until such time as I went to Maryville for our first meeting of all the like-minded ones. So yeah, it was an unknown in a lot of ways, and I don't say I was attracted to it. It was just a disruption in my life for 2 years. The weapon we had was what they call the L5, which was an Italian pack howitzer. It was a gun that could be dismantled and carried on a mule, except the only mules were human beings. We used that a couple of times in Vietnam, where we were trying to, if you're on the road towing an artillery piece, the word would get around that you're on the move. At times we would dismantle the pack howitzer and either stick it in a helicopter, or we would stick it in the Land Rover so that we had an element of surprise. And on the way in, there was a group of Save Our Sons women, and I got bashed with an umbrella. Now, that was not very attractive to me. These are the same people that voted the government of the day in, and here they are, taking violence against people that they don't want to have violence.
Right.
So, yeah, lots of strange things around that time.
And as you say, it must have been so disappointing to come home and find there wasn't that sort of public support, and in your case, sheer hostility.
You quickly learnt that you never ever displayed any ideas that you were there, never talked about it. You didn't wear your RSL badge on your coat or anything like that. It was all gone, one of those things, you just didn't do that.
Well, I carried more water bottles because of my position as a medic. I needed a couple more extra water bottles in case something happened. We had carried a lot of medical stuff, but I also carried extra rounds, grenades, claymore mines. We carried like the rest of them, because you needed all the equipment you could have, and I was no exception. But my priority as a medic or platoon medic was to attend to anyone that might have been wounded or injured first. That's it. I must admit I wasn't a hero or anything like that. So I was quietly shit scared. but you sort of your service prepares you for that type of expectations, that things that might happen, could happen any time to anyone. Doesn't matter whether you're infantry or what, it could happen to you anywhere. It could be on a bloke drive on a truck, all sorts of things, So it's not just infantry, it's everybody that was exposed, and could be killed at any time, either in ambush or the VC's dropping mortars in an area and you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, that type of stuff. But unfortunately that day, 3 civilians were killed in the crossfire. And all we could hear was choppers going past and firing, and what the hell. Anyway, this girl, one of them, the 2 oldies, I think they were farmers, they all panicked. The girl got on her bike, a young girl, and started riding, and she got hit the back of her head with a 50 cal from a horseshoe. I was very upset for the civilians because they would just happen to be caught in it, and the young girl and all that. And that to me was my moment of truth when I thought, this is how you really feel when something like that happens. Right? You suddenly realise this is reality. This is not, just imagination or a bit of, it's just real, Now, the thing that really got me was a couple of days later, we took the bodies back to the horseshoe and then had to find out who their family were to come and pick them up and all that. A few days later, they had a funeral go past. And I remember standing in the background as the funeral's going past, and this little old lady, and I assume must be the girl's mother, dressed in black, and they're going past, and she's looking towards where I was, with the other people, and you could see her eyes just looking at you, and you could almost feel the daggers piercing you. And I'm looking at her and thinking in my brain, I didn't kill her, mate. What are you looking at me for, So, I sort of felt guilty because I was part of the group, that was there. So that always stuck in my mind. But that girl, because when she was lying down, all her hair was matted, and when we took her up to the hill, her hair was matted with the blood, and so it was all spread out. That affected me and my daughter, because for years, I couldn't get close to my daughter because I said to the psych, I said, look, what's wrong? I love my 2 boys, and yet my daughter, I don't want to get close to her, But then he related it back to that and saying, look, you're thinking that your daughter is that girl, I never thought of it that way. So from then on, I changed my whole attitude, and we became closer.
I was a private rifleman, and I'd done a course as an assault pioneer attached to the infantry battalion. So that for that 12 months, I actually served 3 months with the training team at a place called Warlong, just outside of our training area. And I was their driver and bodyguard offsider the three training team, or the two training team members who were there.
This was training the South Vietnamese.
Training South Vietnamese, and that was when they first started doing a lot of the civic action or civil affairs for the village. Australians were very good at that, building schools and a hospital, making sure that there was the medical staff came down and gave dental treatment, medical treatment to the local villagers. So the two warrant officers were very good.
So as a rifleman, were you going out on patrols?
Yeah, before I went down to the village, I used to go out and patrol at different places. So we were attached to rifle companies if they needed, in most cases, a lot of the, if their bunkers needed destroying and couldn't get the engineers out there, the assault pioneers would be the virtual engineers of the rifle company. So yeah, it was very interesting and met some very good and very interesting people.
And in terms of action, what action did you see on those patrols?
Just keep my head down all the time as much as I could. On a number of occasions, it happened so quick with a lot of it that if the company was strung out, by the time you heard the first 2 or 3 rifle shots, by the time you got up at the top, it had all gone. I thought we did a real good job. We did I mean, if you go, when I was down the village for 2 hours, 3 hours, there'd be a lineup of about 50, 60 people waiting to get dental care or medical care. People don't say that that's the things that we were doing there. That's what we were doing there. We weren't just out killing people all the time. So no, I didn't. I thought it was interesting to talk to some of those people. I met people who, in actual fact, served against us. One lady told me that when I was talking to her, she said she was Australians were moving through the area, and obviously a company, and she ducked down into her tunnel with her colleagues, but the Australians didn't move on. They used that as a base camp, and she was down there for 3 or 4 days in the tunnel, and she thought it was funny. She said the Americans would have left, and we would have come up and had a look at what they'd left behind, because they used to just throw all this stuff on the ground. Australians didn't. Australians used to either take it with them or bury it, and you wouldn't find it. So yeah, she thought it was really good, and she actually said that Australians on a couple of occasions had kept her people, and they were well treated.
I was 3 Cav Regiment, and before I got there, I did the crew commander's course. So I was a qualified crew commander as well as driver. So I went over there as a crew commander for a personnel carrier. You're supposed to have 5 days, 3 or 5 days acclimatisation in a sort of a back area of the base. But on the second day, the unit, the 3 Cav unit representatives come around and said, "Oh, how are you going? We need a crew commander and a driver for a convoy escort. So come with me. We've got the liaison officer's vehicle ready to go. You got 20 minutes, off you go." And so myself and my mate who had arrived with me, Tomo, he and I went around and looked at the vehicle. Yeah, started it up. It was right to go. Off you go. And so we were tailing Charlie on day 2 on a a convoy escort of artillery, I think it was, going up to the north of the province. And that was fine going up. The trucks were laden with rounds. That was pretty good. Just a slow trip up. Then on the way back, the trucks were empty. They went a bit faster. And we were tailing Charlie. Of course, in any convoy, tailing Charlie is usually trying to catch up all the time, which was the case. And we had a diff lock as we're going around a bend. And when the road was built up at that stage, at that point, around a curve. And the left-hand track locked and went straight across into the air. We had a 10-tonne of vehicle flying through the air, straight into a wet paddy field. Came to it from 80 kilometres an hour to 0, like that. Of course, all the antennas just snapped off. I can still remember, I can still hear the whirring of the radios as they all went off frequency, and all the ammunition went into the rice paddy. I had guns in my guts. Tomo was driving. He got a split chin out of it, and we're sitting in the middle of a rice paddy. And well, what do we do now? We had no communications.
And the rest of the convoy, they weren't aware of what had happened?
No. They were gone. So that was my entry into Vietnam.
Well, how did you get out of that situation?
Well, fortunately, we were looking around, and behind us there was like the old Indian forts, you know, the old timber Indian forts from the old cowboy Indian days. The local Arvin unit was about 1 kilometre behind us, just off the side of the road. But we weren't game to go there. And of course, we'd all been told before going over there that, how do you identify VC? They're in black pyjamas. Well, in the rice paddy, there was a whole lot of people in black pyjamas. So we didn't want to leave the vehicle. We were manning the guns. Someone came back and had to drag us out. But
well, that was
an exciting start to our holiday in Vietnam. Yeah, so nighttime was probably the most hairiest for me. And we had to open fire a few times, but you don't know what you got. You got your Claymore mines out the front. Had to set them off once. But the next morning, of course, if there was anything there, it would have been cleared. Could have been pigs. You don't know.
There was 6 of us on a Qantas aircraft, and we landed at Ton Son Airport, Ton Son in Vietnam, Saigon. Anyway, we got there, and prior to that, they give us a bit of an intro thing on what to expect when you got there, and we were told that all the bad guys in Vietnam wore black pyjamas. So we're walking down the gangway of the airport, and all I could see was these people running around in black pyjamas, and there was this row after row after row of body bags. And I thought, what the hell have I walked into?
Whose body bags were they?
Yeah, Americans.
That would have been a shock to the system.
It was, like when you go to a war zone like Vietnam, you expect to run into body bags every so often, but not that many in the one hit on day one. My main role, I'd just been freshly promoted to corporal at the time, and I was the unit's vehicle inspector. So I basically lived in Nui Dat Monday to Friday. Saturday and Sunday, I was on a Huey helicopter, and they used to fly me out to all these fire support bases. And in the fire support bases, there would be a Signals Corps FFR Land Rover, and he would have more radio gear in the back of that thing than the ABC. And that was his job, was to listen in to Charlie, you know what I mean?
2 months before we graduated, the infantry instructor came around and said there was suddenly 2 junior officer vacancies, lieutenant vacancies in the 4th Battalion, who was going early next year, and the commanding officer suggested that a couple of recent graduates might be a good idea, and we were asked as a group who was interested in going, and I was one of a very few that put their hand up, and I got selected. It's as simple as that. I knew there'd be tents, I knew there'd be helicopters, and I knew there'd be weapon pits, etc., etc., and it all sort of fitted what I'd been briefed on at that stage of the game. What I didn't expect was that I was able to occasionally have a beer and an ice cream, and that came as a bit of a revelation early on. But other than that, I was pretty well prepared and briefed for what lay in Nui Dat as it was. Yeah.
And you were given command of a rifle platoon?
A rifle platoon, yes. 33 of us.
National servicemen, or were they regular army?
I subsequently learnt, many years later, because it never crossed my mind actually, that I think about 70% of the platoon may have been national servicemen. A rifle company was made up of 3 rifle platoons, each with about 33. That on establishment, that was the strength, but because of the way we operated, we only took about 25 out because there had to be some back to man the perimeter and do other bits and pieces. You'd be the rifle company would be given an area to search and operate in, and that may be 20 grid squares, something like that, quite a large area, and each platoon would be given a segment. I think it was probably a function of discipline. We were a team. We trained as a team, deployed as a team, stayed as a team, and came back as a team, whereas the US system was individual replacement. And and we were in a very limited area. We had one province, I think of the 44, in Vietnam to look after, and that was ours. And I've got to say, we did a very good job of it. And when we were leaving, I understand that villages were crying, which is sort of a pretty good final report card.
How long were you in Vietnam?
9 months. We got withdrawn early when it was decided that we would cease our combat commitment to Vietnam.
So you were one of the last ones there? We
were the last ones. We had the last major battle in Vietnam, which was quite big. We had 5 killed and 30-odd wounded in that. It's September 21, 1971. After the government said we weren't on combat operations anymore in Vietnam, well, guess what? I think the NVA, North Vietnamese Army, listened to the radio as well and heard that, so they decided to come and have a bit of a look, and unfortunately they ran into us 4 hours out.
The Royal Australian Navy also played a role in Vietnam, in particular by providing a destroyer on a rotational basis to deploy with the United States 7th Fleet between 1967 and 71. HMAS Hobart and HMAS Perth came under fire on a number of occasions. Perth was hit once during its first deployment, and Hobart suffered 2 killed and 7 wounded when it was mistakenly hit by missiles from an American jet aircraft.
I was on the Melbourne. We escorted the Sydney up to Vietnam, and then I was on the Perth. We went up to Vietnam twice. We were hit once. Well, mostly we were doing CD, coastal defence elimination. So we were with bigger ships, battleships and cruisers. And what we used to do was to go in close to the coastline and just harass the coastal defence side, so the bigger ships could get in closer to shoot inland. So,
when you talk about harassing the coastal defences, whose defences?
Oh, we were in North Vietnam.
So you were actually in...
We did a lot of our touring up in North Vietnam.
Yeah, you were right up...
Yeah, well, Hai Phong was as far as we went.
And then again, was very different sort of action.
Well, again, in the Navy, it was just like sailing off the coast of Sydney with Sydney shooting at you. It was no different from anywhere else. You had your job to do, you did it. And it was hard sometimes and hot, very hot sometimes. And it happens.
What was your role on the ship?
I was engineering department.
So you're down on the bowels of the ship?
Well, luckily when we were hit, I was forward in the emergency station. So what it was, have 2 people up there and one forward and one after, shuttle the hatches if we come into fire. But the chap doing my job at the back was hit by shrapnel when we were hit. And I had to help carry him up the sick bay. And I didn't recognise him. The only reason I recognised him was the fact he had a geisha girl tattooed on his arm. I slept on the top bunk, he slept on the middle bunk. That's how I saw him every day. I didn't recognise him.
So tell us about that incident when the ship was hit.
Well, like I said, I was at the forward. I was under the bridge type thing on one deck, which is the first deck to run fore and aft. And I heard chatter. So I wonder what the hell that was. I thought something must be loose. But what it was is the shells exploding around us, hitting the ship's side. And they reckon they fired about 200 rounds at us. We were, I think we were in Missouri that time, and they hit us once, which was lucky. And they hit the good part about it. It went to the aftermath, Mount 52, and exploded in the confidential book vault, which was suppressed the explosion, and it ruptured the washdown countermeasure and the fire main, which suppressed the fire. All it did was 7 people were injured with shrapnel. That's all it was. Lucky it was just shrapnel. Because we didn't lose the war in Vietnam, we lost it at home, in America and in here. Like I say, the old saying, we were winning when I left.
And public opinion. Just
So that's it, yeah. Where it gets spat at when you have the ribbon up and you get spat at and called child killer and all that sort of shit. All that sort of garbage.
You experienced that.
That's why we had to go ashore in civilian clothing.
60,000 Australians saw duty in Vietnam with the Army, Navy and Air Force. 523 died as a result of the war. Another 3,500 were wounded or injured.